Okay, this week's key concept is information processing, and theorists in this area they believe that we process information like a computer processes information. So what they propose is that we have three distinct stages of how we take in information and then somehow formulate some kind of movement response. And we do this using a processing part. So this would be our brain, but you can see in a computer metaphor, it's the processor. And we have an input part, which generally is our sensories. So all the different sensory modalities like touch, auditory information, and vision all help us to the input part of the system. And then we have an output part, which is our body, our limbs, which we then use in order to elicit or organize some kind of movement response, which is obviously really important in sports performance. Just like a computer, we have a hardware part and we have a software part. So in terms of the hardware, there's many biological structures in the body that are used to transport information either towards the brain or away from the brain to the muscles to coordinate some type of movement. So we have afferent neurons, and these neurons carry information towards the brain. So your sense of touch and the information that comes from touching things that information is carried by afferent neurons towards your brain, and that gives you information about how hot something is or how strong your grip is on a cup or something like that. Efferent neurons, these take information from the brain to the muscles. So these tell your muscles when to contract, how hard to contract, and obviously that is a key principle of movement coordination. So in terms of the computer analogy, this is the hardware of our information processing system as a sports performer, as a human performer. The software is probably what we are more interested in as in sports psychologists. So we're interested in is what makes experts process information better than a novice. And as you can see here in this diagram, we have an input part. So in a computer analogy, you pressing the keys would give some type of input into the system. The information processing part, like the processor, would then make calculations. They would analyze this information. They'll process this information in order to make some type of output. So in this part, it could be that you write some type of code that makes the computer do something. And in this part, the processor executes that code in order to then have some type of output. In this sense, and then you can see here the diagram of a printer, the output would be printing out what has been put into the computer. It might be a graph or an answer to a question or even your essay. In a sports performance type of example, we can see that there's a lot of parallels between it seems like there's a lot of parallels between how a computer might process that information and how we might suggest that an expert goalkeeper might process similar types of information inputs. So you can see in the top picture here that a goalkeeper is facing a penalty taker, and there's lots of different sensory inputs that are going into his system at that period of time. So there'll be visual information, there'll be auditory information in terms of the crowd, there might be some kind of kinesthetic or proprioceptive information, and all this information will be going into the expert goalkeeper's brain in order to make some kind of movement response. In this information processing part, the goalkeeper then has to decide what to do, when to do it, and how to do it based on the input that he is using to make that decision. And the majority of the time, this will be visual information. So it might be the kinematics of the kicker, so how the body's moving, the angle of his run-up might give some kind of visual cues as to which side the ball might go. And the goalkeeper, based on his experience, will then make some kind of decision. What I've just mentioned there is the experience of the goalkeeper will also have an influence in this area. So its expertise is not just about processing information effectively, but it's also about using that information based on your experience. So the more experienced goalkeepers generally will be better processors of information because they've seen these types of scenes lots of different times, and that helps them in making quick decisions, but also accurate decisions. Once they've made that decision, and it might be the decision to dive left or right, the goalkeeper has to then program his muscles in order to make an effective dive, and that's what the output stage does. So the information processing stage is use the visual information to make some type of decision on where to dive. Once that decision is made, that information gets then programmed into the muscles in order to make some type of effective coordinated movement response. That is this week's key concept.